If the Detroit Pistons don't make any moves at the trade deadline, can they compete with the top Western Conference contenders if they were to even make it to the finals? I'll explain why I think that's going to be a tough challenge in today's episode, Locked On Pistons Podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I am your host, Khahil. I've been covering the Detroit Pistons now coming up on 5 years for the Locked On Network, being a credential media member over the last 3 years. I appreciate all of you guys who make Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. I also want to thank you guys for helping make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in America. We appreciate all of your guys' support. But in today's episode, it's going to be a mailbag episode today. I'm answering all the questions that you guys sent in, such as, can the Pistons survive without Duncan Robinson if he would, for God forbid, knock on wood, suffer some kind of injury? And how can JB Bickerstaff maximize the current personnel on this team in the playoffs on the offensive end of the floor, along with a bunch of other questions that you guys sent in? We'll try to answer as many of those as possible. But the first thing I want to talk about, and the first question I want to answer here, is a question suggesting or wondering if the Detroit, and this was asked by a few people, so I'm not going to call out this specific person. A lot of you guys asked the same question of, if the Detroit Pistons do not make a move before the trade deadline, which is February 5th, we're coming up in about a week and a half on the trade deadline. If the Pistons don't make any moves, can they compete with the teams coming out of the Western Conference? Can they compete with the top contenders in the Western Conference? Now, before answering that question, you have to obviously assume they're coming out the East. And do I believe the Pistons have enough right now to come out of the East? I think they have a chance to. And some of the concerns I'm going to bring up here are the same concerns I have for the Eastern Conference. Nowhere near as much of a concern as I have in the East as I do for the West. But it's definitely things that can come up in the Eastern Conference. Though I do have some level of belief, even with the current roster, there is a chance the Pistons can come out the Eastern Conference. And that's mostly because I don't think there's a lot of strong teams in the Eastern Conference. Now, Jason Tatum coming back for the Celtics could throw a wrench into some things because Boston's been really good. But I do think there's a chance for the Pistons to come out of the East presently constructed. I think it would be tough still, but I think there's a good chance still. Do I believe they would be able to compete with the top Western Conference teams if they were to make it to the finals? I'm sorry to say it to you guys, I absolutely do not. I don't think I honestly think at this point in time that every team in the Eastern Conference presently constructed would probably get beaten within 5 games in the Western Conference. If they went against the Denver Nuggets or the Oklahoma City Thunder, who I believe, those are the two best teams I believe in the West that will be coming out of the West. I don't think there's any East team that can hang with them and in a 7-game series. And the reason why for the Detroit Pistons, I want you guys to follow along here. The Pistons, they have one of the greatest defenses in the league. They have the second best defense. Let's just say that because that's where they're at right now. They have the second best defense in the NBA right now. Over the last month or so, they've had the best defense in the NBA. So they are building their identity, obviously, on the defensive end of the floor, and obviously building their identity on their young, athletic, defensive-minded guys. Like, obviously, Cade Cunningham and Jalen Duren have both improved on the defensive end of the floor. Athletic guys, Asar, Ron, Stu, like all that's what their identity is. It really is a lot like OKC, how they've built their team. Now a bunch of trades, build through the draft, develop your guys, be a great team on defense, be a hyper-athletic team, and that's how you're going to win games. The problem is that even for a team like OKC, which we're about to get into the numbers here, in order to be a legit NBA contender, a legit finals contender, someone you believe can win the championship, there is a base level you have to get to as a half-court offense. You cannot be a bad half-court offense and win in the playoffs. It just does not happen. It doesn't happen. You have to be a good offense. You also can't be bad on defense. You have to be great on defense, that for sure. But you don't see teams who are great on defense and are trash on offense make it to the finals, and you definitely don't see them win the finals. And there's two teams I want to point out here that I think this current Pistons team draws a ton of comparisons to that I don't think people really realize. So one of the teams are the OKC Thunder. So what I wanted to do was bring up the OKC Thunder, who were one of the best teams, were the best team on defense last year. How were they in the half court? Well, during the season, they were the second best half court team in the regular season. But in the playoffs, we saw them go through stretches where they weren't getting the most done in the half court. We see the half court offense across, every team falls off a little bit in the playoffs. Defense gets better in the playoffs. It's harder to score, all that. But compared to who they're playing with in the playoffs, where did OKC rank as a half-court offensive team last year? Because they weren't a team that shot a bunch of threes. They weren't a team that was absolutely the elite of the elite in the half-court last year in the playoffs. They were still dependent on their defense, turn their defense into transition offense, and all that good stuff. Despite all of that, they still were the seventh best half-court offense in the playoffs. So they weren't the top. They weren't as good as Cleveland, as Dallas, as Indiana, who they went against, Milwaukee, the Clippers. Like, there were other teams that were better in the half court than the OKC Thunder, but they reached a certain level that you have to get to be able to win. You can't be bad in the half court and win. So even with a team like OKC that the Pistons are kind of building towards, they got to a base level half court wise where maybe they weren't the best, but they were good enough. And then obviously defensively, they were the best in the playoffs. There's another team that I know a lot of people will love to hear from, or love to hear about, I should say, that I know a lot of people want them to have comparisons to. And that is the 2004 Detroit Pistons. That is a team that relied a ton on their defense. They were one of the best defensive teams in the history of the game. That was what won them championships. And there's a lot of belief that this was a team that, didn't have any offensive stars. I've pushed back against that multiple times in this podcast. I think Chauncey Billups was an offensive superstar. I think he played in an era where it wasn't as noticed, and he sacrificed a lot of his numbers for the betterment of the team. With that said, a lot of people, when they talk about the 2004 team, they talk about how great their defense is, obviously, and act like this was a team that was not very good on offense, that it was just carried by their defense, and they couldn't score the basketball. And that just couldn't be further from the truth. During the regular season, that Piston team had a top 5 offense in basketball. And in the playoffs, they had the 6th best offense overall in the playoffs. That's including everything, putbacks and all that. But then in just the overall half court, they were 10th out of all the teams. That is probably the lowest you will find a team that wins the championship within the half court. That's probably the lowest you will find. They were 10th. Now there's 16 teams that make the playoffs at that time. There was no play-in, obviously. They were 10th in the half court, but they still were able to win the championship. Again, I think that's probably the lowest you will ever see. So the Pistons have to reach a certain level of competency in the half court if they want to win the championship. And right now they are the 17th ranked half court offense in the NBA right now. Right now they are 17th. Right now, they're overall the 9th best offense. All of these numbers are according to Clean the Glass. So the Pistons' defense is 100%, I believe, easily good enough to win a championship. I think they have an argument for the best team or the best defensive team in the league right now, especially over the last month and a half or so. But you can't just be bad. You can't just be bad on offense. You have to reach a certain level. And excuse me, I misspoke earlier about the Pistons' 2004 team's half-court offense in the regular season. They were 12th in the regular season and 12th in overall offense. So this was still an above-average team on offense. This was an above-average team in the half-court on offense while being the best defensive team. Right now, the Pistons are below average half-court offense. If they don't improve that, you're not going to win in the playoffs like that. You're just not going to. It's going to be something that comes back and bites you, and it's going to be the reason why you lose in the playoffs. You can rely on your defense. You can rely on transition. You can rely on fast breaks. You can rely on the other team creating the offense for you. But in the playoffs, when things slow down, you eventually will need to have a competent half-court offense. And if we just go back to my example with OKC, if you compare these two teams, even when OKC struggled within the half court at times in the playoffs last year, SGA is on a different level than Cade is as a scorer, just a completely different level. And he is just on a completely different level when it comes to efficiency overall as a scorer than Cade. So I bring that up because even when the half-court stalls or you start to see your offense become less efficient, SGA is falling from, you have a main superstar that creates most of your offense, right? Just like the Pistons do in Cade. The difference is SGA is doing it at such historic levels, at such historic efficiency levels, that what he's falling from that to in the playoffs falling to where Cade is right now, efficiency-wise. Whereas Cade, when he gets to the playoffs, expecting him to carry all of it offensively, there is a much lower floor that he'll reach because he's just not as good of a scorer as SGA, not as efficient of a scorer. So if he doesn't have a great series as in the half court as a scorer, he will reach much lower floors than SGA will. So there's, again, that base floor I talk about. A team led by SGA in the playoffs is going to have a base level floor where they can do because of how great he is offensively within the half court. Cade has made a ton of improvements. He's made a lot of progressions, but he's still not the most uber efficient guy. And if you are putting all of it on him, which currently they will in the playoffs, if you're putting it all on him and you go against another good team that slows it down and forces you to play within the half court routinely, that floor of an offense is much lower than both the teams I just mentioned. The OKC Thunder last year, and even your 04 Pistons that relied a ton on defense, and people considered this wasn't a good offensive team. That's not the case, and they had more efficient guys that, again, a base level floor there, especially SGA and OKC. So to answer the question, I brought all that up as my evidence to say I don't believe they can compete with any of the teams coming out the West. I don't think their half-court offense is good enough. They don't have enough shooting, and I do think, especially against one of those teams, it might even catch up to them in the East. But especially in the West, when you go against another equally as good defensive team, or you go against an historic offensive player like Jokic, you will need to be able to keep up. And if they slow the game down, I think that's where the Pistons are going to come into problems. We've seen it happen this year, especially in the game against Houston. They have to improve that if they want to win a championship this year, I believe. So let me know, comment section down below or over on Twitter at Khahil. Do you guys agree, disagree with me, and why do you feel either way? Let me know. Coming up, another question a lot of you guys asked: can the Pistons survive without Duncan Robinson if he were, knock on wood, suffer any type of injury? We'll talk about it coming up. Today's episode is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax full service, you can now have your taxes done for you by trusted local experts, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with local TurboTax experts in person or connect online to handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it for you. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today with TurboTax. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review. And whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on, that's another great way to support the podcast. And also, like I've told you guys before, the NBA trade deadline is coming up soon. And if you want to join the Everydayer Club, we got something ready for you before the trade deadline. If you need a group chat to keep up with the chaos, join ours. The Everydayer Club gets you access to a group chat and Discord for just Locked On Pistons fans, plus national chats where you can go hang out with fans from across the league. You also get ad-free versions of this show, and if you sign up by the trade deadline on February 5th, you can use code DEADLINE to get your first month for free. Tap the link in the show notes to learn more today. But let's go ahead and answer some of these questions, some other questions you guys have asked. Let me get the person. I want to make sure I'm shouting out the people who asked these questions. The first one, a lot of you guys asked them. I couldn't shout out everybody, but where was I lost who. If you're listening to the podcast and you know you asked this question. Oh, right here. This was from King Vasil. said the Pistons are in a great spot right now, but what happens if, God forbid, Duncan Robinson is sidelined for an extended period of time after the deadline? Is winning even possible at that point? Shooters are needed. I think they would be in a lot of trouble if Duncan were to get hurt, if he were to get hurt or miss any kind of time. He is carrying so much of the Pistons offense when it comes to shooting, and they just don't have anybody else that is able to do it like he is for them. The offense right now is 9 points better with him on the floor. The team is nearly 3 percentage points better efficiency-wise with him on the floor. He's the only guy this team has that has this level of spacing, this level of gravity, and these numbers right here are why JB Bickerstaff is going to him so much, even though the defense is 9 points better with him off. Because it's a trade-off here that you're making. In 2026, I almost said 2025. I'm caught up. In 2026, in the NBA, you have to have a level of shooting. And the Pistons are really walking the line of how much shooting do you really need and how much shooting can you get away with. They are walking that line, and they're only getting away with it because they have one of the best, and that's what Duncan's been this year. He has been one of the best shooters in the entire NBA on heavy volume. That's why they've been able to get away with it, because of how good of a shooter they have. If they had someone in Duncan's spot that was even just like 10% worse than him, I don't think they get away with it. I don't think they are. But because of the efficiency he's shooting it with and the volume that he's shooting it with, he's able to make up for it. He's in the 94th percentile when it comes to spot-up threes. He's in the 73rd percentile when it comes to threes in transition. He's shooting 41% on those threes in transition, 46% on spot-up threes. And again, this is on heavy volume. Heavy volume. He's shooting 41% overall in catch and shoot shots. Unguarded shots, 44%. Unguarded threes, he's shooting 38% on big volume. So they don't have anyone else that's able to get those type of shots up. The other thing with Duncan as well is that he has a lot of confidence and quick release, and his release, where he releases the ball, is very high. Along with that size he has, it allows him to get some of these shots that maybe are considered guarded at a cleaner clip and get a cleaner look for himself than maybe any of the other players on the team. Other players wouldn't be able to get some of those shots that Duncan gets off. Duncan is also probably the only player on the team that is able to hit movement threes. He's definitely the only one that can hit them at the clip he does. But I don't know if they even have another player on the team that you could run like these movement three sets for and expect him to hit. Like maybe Chaz if he got a lot of time. But as much as I've liked what we've seen from Chaz, his shooting hasn't been exactly consistent every time he's come on the floor. Now, last time we saw him, it was. But and he has a long history of being a fantastic shooter, so you'd expect that's something he could do for sure. I'm not saying he wouldn't. But from what we've seen and what we can trust, Duncan is the only movement shooter on this team. Last year they had Malik and they had THJ. This team only has Duncan. So if Duncan were to go down, again, knock on wood, I don't know if this team would be able to survive it. What makes me believe that maybe they could is because they've had to play so many games without so many players, and this team is as deep as they are, is that they would be able to plug and play players to where maybe the offense obviously would fall off, but maybe the defense would get so much better where they could sustain for a certain level of time, especially in the regular season. They would be able to sustain for a minute. But in the playoffs, I definitely don't think they'd be able to sustain for a long period of time. And even during the regular season, could they sustain for like a week? Sure. For a long time, having to play without another shooter, I think eventually it would catch up to them. And they would really struggle at that point. So that's another reason why I've been beating the drum of they have to get another shooter. They don't have to become the Celtics. I'm not suggesting they need to become one of the most high-volume three-point shooter teams in the league. But the amount of responsibility you are putting on Duncan Robinson's shoulders, if anything were to happen, they really don't have an answer for it. They are already in the bottom five when it comes to three-point rate. If they lose Duncan, that's crashing to almost the bottom of the league. And you're not winning basketball games as the team that takes the least amount of threes in the league. Again, you're already walking that line. You lose him, and you're just not getting threes up. Now you're way over the line, and you won't be able to recover from that. So I do think they need to address it. And if they were to lose Duncan, I think it would be absolutely killer. And again, that's why I've said this already, but that is why JB Bickerstaff is trusting him so much and playing him so much, despite some of the concerns defensively. He's just the only shooter that can make the trio, or can help make the trio of Cade, Ausar, and Duncan, or Cade, Ausar, and Duren work, because they do need shooting at the other positions around them to space the floor, and he does that. No one else is going to do it at the clip he does. So, and no one else requires the same level of attention and has that same type of respect from defenses as Duncan. No one else does. So, hopefully they get some shooting. Hopefully they get some shooting. Duncan stays healthy the rest of the year. Like, that's the hope. But if a situation like that were to arise, they need to be prepared for it. Let's go ahead and get to the next question. This one's from Dirt on Twitter. He says, how do you see the Pistons' chances of making the finals if any of these situations were to happen? A, they trade Karras. B, they trade Ivy, Karras, Tobias, at least two of them together with a pick. 3, they make no moves. If they trade Karras alone, I don't know how much they're making or they would actually be getting. Now, you could argue that they are benefiting from addition by subtraction, because now Karras isn't playing obviously just not playing at all, and not all of his minutes are going to Dennis Jenkins, which I think would be really good for them. So maybe a little bit would improve with that. If they trade Ivy, Karras, Tobias, that means they're making a swing, or maybe swing is too strong of a word, but they are definitely making a bigger move. And I'm assuming if they were to do that, it would be a move for like a guy that I've been asking for, like a guy like an MPJ, like that type. If they were to be doing that, I think that is an overwhelming net positive and would serve a lot of what this team needs and really fill in a lot of the holes. So I would say I would feel very confident of them making the finals. And I actually would even give them a chance of winning the finals if they were to make that kind of move. If they make no moves, I believe there is still a chance the team makes the finals 100%, but I'm not nearly as confident, and I don't know. Like, if you were to ask the question, Pistons versus the field, I'm taking the field. Like, and there's not many teams in NBA history, I guess I should say, that you're saying I take that team over the field in their conference. But I'm just not as confident that they would be able to make the finals with some of the concerns they have within the half court in this situation. So let's answer one more question here before we move on to the next topic. This is from Kian on Twitter. It says, what is your list or stats or data websites that help you write and analyze players, like the Clean the Glass that you use? And what other websites so we can follow along with your writing and potting? So the stats that I get my stats from databaller.com. Does a great job of finding you on-off data and a lot of advanced statistics I have been using on the podcast. I have a subscription through Locked On with Synergy Sports. That's something that people won't be able to get. It's very, 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 very expensive unless you have a partnership or a deal with a network or a team, whatever. But I use Synergy, Data Baller. I use NBA RAPM. I use Cleaning the Glass. And I also use PPP stats for on-off data. That's where I really look at all of it. Basketball Reference I use for quick hitting if I'm just trying to find some quick stats, some quick season data. Nothing too crazy. If I'm looking for anything like deeper than just points, rebounds, assists, stuff like that, I won't really go to Basketball Reference. But obviously you can go there to get some like quick hitting numbers. But for all the numbers that I try to get into to really dive deeper and to kind of paint the story, those are the sites that I mentioned earlier. Coming up, though, we have a question about how can JB Bickerstaff maximize this team's roster, specifically their half-court offense, in the playoffs if they were to not make any moves. I'll give my suggestions coming up. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like being in an NBA arena, the crowd, the energy, the moment. Getting tickets, though, that part hasn't always been so simple. That's why Game Time has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast without the hassle. It puts the advantage back where it belongs, with the fans. Love seeing all the all-in prices up front so you don't have any surprise fees at checkout. You can check out the view from your seat before buying so the decision is made easier for you. Zone deals that stand out, you can choose the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you can save. Everything feels quick, intuitive, and stress-free from start to finish. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Game Time app, and remember, it's gametime.co, not .com, gametime.co. Again, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. Let's get to the next question here. This one is from Senjuku. Says, ways you think JB should diversify the half-court offense if no personnel to help the issue is added at the deadline. They went on to say to explain their words further. How do you see, or how should JB diversify the half-court offense in a playoff setting if no personnel to directly help the issue is added at the deadline? How can JB maximize the current roster as it stands if he isn't already? I think JB has done a fantastic job at maximizing this team's defensive ceiling. I think this team is operating. I don't know how much better they could even be defensively. Again, over the last month or so, they've been the top defense in the NBA. On the season, they are the second best defense in the NBA. I think he has done a fantastic job at maximizing their defense. 100%. I have nothing to complain about defensively. I think he has some good defensive personnel. I think he's been using that defensive personnel really well. I think they've gone with some strategies that even I questioned at the time that have ended up working, such as putting Asar on not the other team's best player, just putting him at the point of attack and asking the best player on the opposing team to beat them by themselves. Like they did that with Jalen Brown. That's worked out 3 times out of the 4. Now, it hasn't worked out against the Clippers. Kawhi's destroyed them. But, I think I really like what JB has done defensively. On offense, I think 2 things can be true. I think he's operating with some tough personnel at times. But I also think he can be much better with how he creates an offense for this team. A few things I've suggested, which they've started to do recently. The first thing that comes to my mind instantly is you need to be using Asar Thompson in the screen and roll way more than they are. If teams are going to try to hide their bigs on Asar, which they have over the last few games, put him in the screen and roll, and now you're creating easy shots. And they've done that to his credit, and I think it's generated good offense for them. Now, they don't have enough shooters at times to take advantage of it still. Like Duncan was 2 of 8 the other day, and that hurt. But I think using Asar as a pick-and-roll guy would help a ton. I think something else that they need to get to more often, especially in the playoffs, is moving Cade off the ball and having someone else bring the ball up and kind of set the offense and have Cade coming off of some off-ball actions. They've done that a little bit this year, but I still feel like Cade has been relied upon way too much to attack a defense from the top of the key, and I think that's really asking a lot of him to consistently, every single possession, attack a defense from the top of the key, run a pick and roll with all these bodies being thrown at you. Now, the best players in the league, they deal with it and they create good offense. And for the majority of the season, Cade has done that. But when you don't have much other offensive personnel in the playoffs, teams will key on that. And you need to find, while I believe that teams sending 2 at Cade, and the first month of the season backed this up, that doing that isn't good offense or good defense for the opposing team because Cade is good at picking that apart. In the playoffs, you don't want the ball to just be completely out of your best player's hands. You do still want to draw up situations where your best player is still touching the ball and getting put in key advantageous positions to score the basketball. So one of the actions they do a ton is they'll have, let's say, Asar bring the ball up the floor. They'll have him run what looks to be a pick and roll with Asar, or not with Asar, with Stu or Jalen Duren flowing to his right. They'll have Cade in the weak side corner on the left side. As Duren comes off that pick and roll, the big man thinks, okay, I got to be in drop coverage. They're running pick and roll. He's diving to the rim, but instead of diving to the rim, he's actually running to the corner to set an off-ball screen for Cade. So he's now wrapping around off the screen. And now the big is out of position. Cade's usually catching this ball with the trailing defender. And now a big that's in the paint, because the big was preparing like, okay, they're running a pick and roll at the top of the key. Let me get in my coverage. Now Duren is running to the corner. Now he's in a bad position to guard Cade coming off the screen. So now Cade is either getting to a mid-range, he's getting to a floater, or the big man's reacting late, and now that's when he's throwing his one-hand touch pass lob to Jalen Duren. Obviously, you can't run that every single time, but that is one of the actions I've seen them run for Cade when he gets off the ball. I think that's stuff you can do for him. I do think that's something that should be paid attention, or you should really be making an effort to do quite a bit a game so Cade isn't constantly just seeing doubles and traps or whatever coverage he's seeing at the top of the key, because that's harder to deal with, especially against a top defense in the NBA. Another thing I would do offensively, I think JB can go to, that would help this offense is you got to just play the best players. You got to play the right players and put them in the right situations. I don't care what pick they were picked at. I don't care if they're undrafted, two ways. Like, Dennis Jenkins has been their best guard off the bench for a while now, and he needs to be playing a lot of minutes. And if you're going to play Dennis, play him with, maybe you could try to find ways to utilize Sasser, who is a really good off-the-ball scorer. And you can run Dennis as the on-ball guard. And now you're playing two guards. You're playing one guard who's able to get to the paint more, and now you have that real good scorer, shooting type of guy off of him. Like, I think they just got to play. I think playing Dennis more would do a lot for them, especially in the non-Cade minutes, and eventually move off of Caris LeVert or just don't play him. Because Caris has just been bad for a minute. For a long time, he's been bad. So those are some suggestions I have for what they could do in the half court in the playoffs. I do think that you should be trying to. I think you want to find a balance in the half court where it's not just Cade creating offense. And I really hope they start to experiment this more as the season gets deeper and you're getting prepared for the playoffs, because the Pistons have a good lead on the East, and I don't think they're going to lose it. Like, start to experiment a little more. And they're starting to do this, especially with Duren. Experiment with using Duren as like an initiator, as the ball handler. Let him try to attack some things. We've seen Asar start to do a little more of this over the last week against Houston and the game before Houston. I forget who it was. But who was it? Why am I forgetting what team it was? But start experimenting with Asar initiating the actions, because all these other teams that have guys like Cade, guys who are heavy on-ball, high-usage guys creating your offense, they all at least have one other guy. They usually all at least have one. A lot of them have multiple. Like OKC, they have so many ball handlers, so many guys that can get downhill against you, make a decision. You go to Luka, wherever team he has, he's had Kyrie or LeBron and Austin Reeves. And wherever you go, they have multiple guys that if they're off the ball, you can trust them to initiate the action, at least get downhill and force the next pass. And that was one of the biggest sells with this team when Weaver drafted all of them years ago. It was, okay, look, maybe they're all not the greatest shooters, but we are going to eventually trust that Duren will be able to put the ball on the deck and then make the right decision because he's a good passer. We are going to trust that Asar Thompson is going to be able to put the ball on the deck and make the right decision because he's a good passer. Like, that was the sell. If you have multiple ball handlers that can attack gaps and then make the right read off of that, that makes you much harder to guard, even if you are not the greatest shooting team. So I think that's something they really need to try to force the development of, especially with Duren and Asar, because those guys are probably going to be one of the two guys playing some of the most minutes in the playoffs for you. You need to start experimenting that a little bit, because once you get to the playoffs, if it is all on Cade and there is not shooting added to the team, it's going to be tough for him to do everything. And like I said earlier in the podcast, he's not an SGA level. I love Cade, but he's not an SGA level of scorer. He's not an SGA level of efficient scorer to where he can handle all of that and the floor not be low. Like, the floor can be pretty low if he's not having a great game, especially shooting from deep wise. We saw what it looked like last year against the Knicks. Now, I think Cade is infinitely better than last year, especially off the pull-up threes. But again, just asking him to do all of it, I don't think would be wise. And again, part of the sell with this core was the fact you trust him to put the ball on the deck, get into the gaps, and then make the ball swing, find an open shot. You got to start experimenting that, because Cade won't be able to do it all himself, especially if we're operating under the situation of they're just not making any moves. So that's what I would suggest for maximizing this offense in the half court for the playoffs. But that's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. Free and available on all your podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. Leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Stay safe out there, and peace out, everybody.